The Velthari female collapsed at my doorstep during the worst ice storm Kepler 442b had seen in 30 years. I found her when I opened the door to check my weather sensors. She was half frozen, clutching two small bundles to her chest, her amber blood leaving a trail in the snow behind her. I didn't ask questions. 30 years of colonial warfare had taught me that questions could wait until after survival. The cabin wasn't built for four. Hell, it was barely built for one. I'd chosen this remote outpost specifically because the nearest human settlement was 200 kilometers away, and the nearest Velthari encampment was even further. After what I'd done during the siege of New Meridian, I figured the universe owed me some solitude. The female's name was Kaleth. I learned this 3 days later when her fever finally broke, and she could form coherent words. Her children, a boy and a girl, maybe 4 and 6 in human years, were called Vren and Sila. They watched me with those enormous Velthari eyes, the kind that saw in spectrums humans couldn't imagine, and I wondered what horrors those eyes had witnessed. "You are Commander Marcus Webb," Kaleth said, her voice like wind through broken glass. "The Butcher of New Meridian." I set down the bowl of nutrient broth I'd prepared. "Former Commander. And I don't use that title. My mate was at New Meridian." The silence that followed could have frozen the air between us. I waited for her to reach for a weapon, to curse me, to do something that would justify throwing her back into the cold. Instead, she looked at her children, then back at me. "He was already dead before your forces arrived." The Velthari High Command sacrificed the garrison to buy time for the civilian evacuation. Her eyes, deep violet, like bruised twilight, held no accusation. "You killed soldiers who were already ghosts. We all were in that war." I didn't know what to say to that. 20 years of nightmares, and this widow was offering me absolution I hadn't asked for. "The storm will last another week," I said instead. "You can stay until then." Vren, the boy, tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered something in rapid Velthari. I caught only fragments. My translation implant was military grade but outdated. "He asks if you will hurt us," Kaleth translated. "No. He asks why." I looked at the child, at his two thin arms and the way he positioned himself between me and his sister. "Protecting her. 4 years old and already a soldier." "Because I'm tired," I said. "And because hurting people stopped making sense a long time ago." The first week was an exercise in careful avoidance. My cabin had 2 rooms, a main living area with the kitchen and my bed, and a small storage space I converted into sleeping quarters for them. I gave them the warmer room. I told myself it was practical. Velthari didn't regulate body temperature as efficiently as humans. The truth was simpler. I couldn't sleep anyway. Sila was the first to approach me voluntarily. She found me repairing the atmospheric processor on the 4th day, my hands deep in corroded wiring. "What is that?" she asked in accented but clear standard. "Keeps us breathing. The air outside has too much nitrogen. On Veltar Prime, the air is perfect. I've never been." She tilted her head, that peculiarly Velthari gesture of curiosity. "You fought us for 10 years and never visited. Soldiers don't sightsee, kid. My father was a soldier," he said the same thing. She paused. "Mother says you killed many Velthari." I set down my tools. There was no point in lying. "I did. Do you feel bad?" 20 years of therapy, medication, and isolation hadn't given me an answer to that question. A 6-year-old Velthari girl expected one in the next 30 seconds. "Every day," I said finally. "Every single day." She considered this with the gravity only children possess. "Good," she said. "Father said only monsters don't feel bad. You're not a monster." She left before I could respond. I sat there for a long time, a broken processor in my hands, wondering when a child's forgiveness had become the thing I needed most. By the end of the 2nd week, the storm showed no signs of stopping. My supplies would hold for another month. I always kept extra, old habits from the war. But the cabin was growing smaller by the day. Kaleth healed faster than I expected. Velthari biology was remarkable that way. On the 8th day, I found her standing at my window, staring at the white void outside. "I should tell you why we're here," she said without turning. "You don't have to. I do. You've given us shelter and food. You deserve truth." She finally faced me. The light caught the scarring on her neck. Plasma burns, old but still visible. After Varric died, I returned to the homeworld with the children. The war orphan programs were supposed to provide for us. Instead, she touched her scars. The new government decided that families of failed soldiers were a reminder of defeat. They wanted us gone. Gone? Quietly. Accidents. Disappearances. Vren saw them kill our neighbor. A widow, like me. They made it look like a heating malfunction. Her hands clenched. I took the children and ran. stole a transport, crashed on this planet 3 days before the storm hit, and walked 200 kilometers through a blizzard. The alternative was death. I understood that calculus. I'd made similar ones during the war. The storm will end eventually, I said. What's your plan after? I don't have one. The admission seemed to cost her. I thought only of reaching shelter. I didn't think beyond survival. That's the first mistake they teach you to avoid in officer training. Yes, well. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I was never an officer. Just a teacher. A teacher? Literature? Pre-war Velthari poetry mostly. Utterly useless in the current situation. I surprised myself by laughing. It was a rusty sound. Unpracticed. I have a storage unit full of military survival gear, dried rations for 6 months, and enough weapons to hold off a battalion. Not a single book. A tragedy. Maybe you can recite some poetry while we slowly go insane from cabin fever. This time, she actually smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger, less like a refugee and more like the teacher she claimed to be. I know 3,000 poems by heart. You may regret that offer. I didn't regret it. The routine emerged without discussion. Kalith took over cooking. Velthari cuisine was strange but edible, and she had a talent for making my military rations almost palatable. I handled repairs and maintenance, the constant battle against a planet that wanted to kill us. Vren and Sela carved out their own spaces, the way children do, claiming corners of the cabin as forts and kingdoms. It was Vren who found the old tactical display buried in my storage. He came to me holding it like a treasure. What is this? Holomap projector. We used it to plan operations. Show me. I should have said no. The maps it contained were classified, and more importantly, they were memories I'd spent 2 decades trying to bury. But something in his eyes, curiosity without fear, made me power it on. The siege of New Meridian bloomed in blue light above my kitchen table. Vren watched in silence as I explained the troop movements, the supply lines, the fatal choke points where thousands had died. His mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, but she didn't stop me. Father was here, Vren said, pointing to a defensive position. Mother showed me once. Old files. The garrison held that line for 16 hours. Longest defensive stand of the entire war. You broke through. Eventually. He looked up at me. How? I could have lied. Softened it. Instead, I showed him exactly how. The flanking maneuver, the artillery coordinates, the breach that cost 400 human lives and ended the siege. Brutal, he said when I finished. It wasn't a condemnation. Just an observation. War is. Father's letter said humans fight differently. He said you don't stop, even when you should. It's not always a good thing, but you won. Everyone lost, kid. Some of us just lost less. Kalith stepped forward then, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. Enough military history for one day. Go practice your standard reading with Sila. Vren left reluctantly. Kalith sat across from me, the holomap still glowing between us. Thank you, she said. For what? Teaching your son about the battle where his father died, for treating him as capable of understanding. Everyone else, teachers, counselors, even family, spoke to him in soft voices. Hid the truth. He knew they were lying. She reached out and touched the holographic lines of the siege. He needed someone to tell him what really happened. Even if it's painful. Most people don't see it that way. Most people are fools. She deactivated the map. You're not what I expected, Commander Webb. Marcus. I haven't been commander in 20 years. Marcus Doy. She tested the name. I expected a monster, or at least a broken man hiding in guilt. I'm a broken man hiding in guilt. No. You're a tired man who did terrible things for reasons he believed in, and now you're trying to figure out what's left. She stood. That's not broken. That's human. The ice storm finally ended on day 23. I woke to silence, the absence of wind rattling the walls, and found Sela pressed against the window, watching the alien sunrise paint the snow in shades of pink and gold. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's deadly. The temperature drop after a storm like this can freeze you solid in minutes. But it's still beautiful. I couldn't argue with that. With the storm over, decisions had to be made. The nearest human settlement, Outpost Theta 7, had refugee processing. They could provide Kalith and the children with legal status, housing, maybe even transport to one of the core worlds. It was the logical choice. You should stay another week, I said at breakfast. Let the temperature stabilize. Kalith paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. We've imposed long enough. It's not imposition. It's survival. Going out there too soon would be suicide. And after the week, then Then you go to Theta 7. File for asylum. Start over. What about you? What about me? You could come. They have veteran services. Other people. I came here to get away from other people. That was before. Before what? She looked at her children, at the cabin that had become something almost like a home over 3 weeks. Then, back at me. Before you remembered what it's like to not be alone. I didn't have an answer for that. The week stretched into 2. The temperature remained dangerous. That's what I told myself. And there were repairs that needed doing, supplies to organize, 1,000 small tasks that required attention. Kayla didn't call me on the excuses. She simply integrated herself deeper into the routine, and her children did the same. Vren began following me on maintenance rounds. He had an engineer's mind, quick and precise, and he absorbed technical knowledge like a sponge. I caught myself explaining things I'd never taught anyone, not just how systems worked, but why I'd designed them that way, the philosophy behind redundancy and fail-safes. You think like a soldier, he said one day, watching me reinforce the backup generator housing. I was one for 30 years. No. You think like you're always ready for attack. Everything has 2 ways to work and 3 ways to survive. Is that bad? He considered. No. It's just, sad. That you had to learn to think that way. Sela's approach was different. She didn't want to learn systems. She wanted to learn me. She asked questions constantly. What was my favorite color? I didn't have one. What music did I listen to? None anymore. Had I ever had children? No. Had I ever wanted them? I stopped answering. You're lonely, she announced one evening, with the devastating certainty of childhood. I prefer solitude. That's what lonely people say. How do you know what lonely people say? Mother was lonely after father died. She said the same things. Sela climbed onto the chair beside me. But she's not as lonely anymore. Neither are you. I looked at this child. This enemy's child. This refugee. This small creature who had seen her world collapse and still found room for observation and hope. Maybe not, I admitted. They came on a morning when the sky was clear enough to see the stars. I was checking the perimeter sensors when the alert triggered. 3 contacts moving fast, approaching from the south. Military formation. The signature was Velthari. Kalith. I kept my voice calm. Get the children to the basement shelter, now. She didn't ask questions. The urgency in my tone was enough. Within 30 seconds she had Vren and Sila moving down the reinforced hatch I'd installed years ago. What is it? She asked from the ladder. Hunters. Has to be. 3 of them. Her face went pale. They found us. After all this time, they haven't found anything yet. Stay down. Stay quiet. No matter what you hear. I sealed the hatch and activated the cabin's defensive systems. They weren't much. Motion sensors, a few automated deterrents, reinforced walls. I'd built this place for solitude, not siege. My weapons were another matter. The combat rifle came apart in my hands from muscle memory. 20 years of rust, and I still remembered every component. Sidearm on my hip. Knife on my thigh. Grenades in a belt I never thought I'd wear again. I was the butcher of New Meridian. It was time to remember why. They announced themselves from 50 meters out, a courtesy I hadn't expected. 3 Velthari in light, tactical gear, the kind special operations used. Their leader had silver insignia on her collar. You an occupant, she called out. We have no quarrel with you. We seek only the criminals you harbor. I stepped onto my porch. Rifle visible but not raised. There are no criminals here. Only refugees. Kalith Vorsena is wanted for theft of government property and sedition against the Velthari Reconstruction Council. The children are to be returned for proper rehabilitation. Rehabilitation. I let the word hang. Is that what they're calling re-education camps now? The leader's eyes narrowed. You know much about internal Velthari politics for a human hermit. I know what happens to war orphans under your new government. I've seen the reports. Reports from human intelligence sources. Propaganda. Reports from Velthari dissidents who managed to escape. They were quite detailed about the rehabilitation process. I kept my voice flat. The chemical conditioning. The memory erasure. The children who went in whole and came out hollow. One of the other hunters shifted uncomfortably. The leader silenced her with a glance. Surrender them, human. This need not become violent. You're on my property. You came armed to my home. You threatened children under my protection. I raised the rifle. It was violent the moment you arrived. You're one man against 3 trained operatives. I'm the butcher of New Meridian. I've killed more Velthari than most generals. Check your briefings. I watched the recognition hit. The flicker of fear, quickly suppressed. Even 20 years later, the name carried weight. Commander Webb. The leader's voice changed. We assumed you dead. Disappointed? The war is over, Commander. Old grudges serve no one. This isn't about grudges. It's about 3 people who came to me for help. I gave them my protection. I don't break my word. For traitors? For the family of an enemy soldier? For a mother and her children? That's all they are now. The standoff held for a long moment. I could see them calculating. Could they take me? 3 against 1, but I had cover and they were in the open. And the reputation. The reputation was doing half the work. This isn't over, the leader said finally. We'll report your interference. There will be consequences. There always are. That's why I have the rifle. They withdrew. I watched them until they were specks on the horizon, then waited another hour before I unsealed the shelter. Kalith emerged first, the children behind her. Her face was wet with tears she'd been hiding from Vren and Sela. You could have let them take us, she said. They would have left you alone. No. Why? We're nothing to you. Strangers. Enemies. I looked at Vren, who was trying to look brave and mostly succeeding. At Sela, who held her brother's hand like it was the only anchor in a storm. At Kalith, whose eyes held a question I wasn't sure how to answer. You stopped being strangers somewhere around day 5, I said. And you were never my enemies. Just people caught in the same war I was. They'll come back. With more hunters. With legal authority. Probably. And you'll fight them again? As many times as necessary. The next 2 days were tense. I reinforced what I could. Set up early warning systems in a wider perimeter. Taught Kalith to use a sidearm. She learned quickly. That teaching instinct applied to everything apparently, including self-defense. You fought in the war, I said, watching her practice. Not just as a civilian, toward the end. When they needed everyone. She ejected the magazine, reloaded, took aim again. I was terrible at it. Shaking hands. Couldn't hit anything. You're not shaking now. Now I have something concrete to protect. That makes a difference. Vren insisted on learning too. I hesitated. He was 4, far too young. But Kalith overruled me. He's seen death. Pretending he hasn't won't help him. Better he learns to face it. So I taught him. Not to shoot, not yet, but the basics. How to move quietly. How to hide. Where to run if the adults fell. He absorbed it with that same focused intensity he'd shown with the holomaps. I don't want to run, he said. I want to fight. Fighting is for when you can't run. Running keeps you alive. Father didn't run. Your father was protecting people who couldn't run. That's different. You didn't run. At the siege. I crouched to his eye level. Kid, I've run from more battles than I've fought. The ones I stayed for were the ones where running meant leaving people behind. That's the only time you stay. Understand? He nodded slowly. I understand. Sela's contribution was different. She made art. Drawings on scrap paper I'd never used. Depicting the cabin. The snow. Figures I gradually recognized as us. In her pictures, we were always together. Always safe. This is our family, she told me, showing me her latest work. You, me, Vren, mother. Not. I started. You are. She said it with absolute certainty. You protect us. You teach us. You stay with us. That's what family does. I looked at the drawing. 4 figures, hand in hand. The human one was smiling. I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually smiled. The Velthari government sent their formal response 3 weeks later. A gunship, 2 squads of Marines, and a diplomatic officer with the authority to negotiate or annihilate. I watched them land through my scope, counting weapons, calculating odds. The math was bad. The math was always bad when you were outnumbered 8 to 1. Marcus. Kalith's voice came from behind me. You can't fight all of them. I know. Then what's the plan? I'm still working on that. The diplomatic officer approached alone, hands visible. A gesture of good faith or a test. I met her at the perimeter line, rifle slung but ready. Commander Webb. She was older than the hunters, with the gray-tinged scales that indicated advanced age. I am Counselor Velthari. I've come to resolve this situation. Situation. That's a clean word for hunting refugees. The Reconstruction Council doesn't recognize the term refugee for citizens who've abandoned their legal obligations. And children? What legal obligations do they have? The children are wards of the state. Their mother forfeited custody when she fled. Their mother saved them from your rehabilitation programs. From having their minds erased and rewritten. The counselor's expression flickered. You've heard propaganda. I've heard testimony. Survivors. Children who remember what was done to them. I stepped closer. I've seen what governments do when they're afraid of the next generation asking questions. Human governments did it too. The excuses are always the same. You presume to lecture me on governance? I presume to protect 3 people from being dragged back to a system designed to destroy them. Call it whatever you want. She studied me for a long moment. You have no legal standing here. This planet falls under joint colonial agreement. Harboring Velthari citizens against official warrants is an act of interference in internal affairs. Then arrest me, if necessary. Try. I gestured at the Marines behind her. You'll win eventually. But you'll lose soldiers. And then you'll have to explain to your council why a retrieval operation for 1 widow and 2 children turned into a combat engagement with a decorated war hero. The human media loves that kind of story. You would use your reputation as a weapon? My reputation is the only weapon I have left. Might as well make it count. The standoff held. Somewhere behind me I knew Caliph was watching with Vren and Sela. They were my responsibility now. My people. The thought no longer felt strange. There may be another option, the counselor said finally. One that satisfies legal requirements without unnecessary conflict. I'm listening. The colonial agreement allows for sanctuary claims. If a Velthari citizen formally requests protection from a human resident, and that resident accepts permanent responsibility for their welfare. Permanent responsibility? You would become their legal guardian, under human law. Responsible for their housing, their education, their integration into human society. It's a significant commitment. And the Velthari government would accept this? The Velthari government would prefer a clean resolution. Dead children make poor propaganda for reconstruction efforts. Her voice was bitter. Whatever you think of us, Commander, we're not all monsters. Just enough of you. Yes. Just enough. She looked tired suddenly. Do you accept? I turned to look at the cabin. At the door where 3 figures stood waiting. A mother. A boy. A girl. Strangers who had become something else in the span of 2 months. I need to ask them first. Caliph's answer was immediate. Yes, you don't want to think about it. This would tie you to me. To this place. To human society. We've been tied to you since you opened your door in a blizzard. She took my hands. The first time she touched me voluntarily. You could have left us to die. Could have thrown us out. Could have surrendered us to the hunters. Every choice you've made has been to protect us. Why would we want anything else? I'm not. I struggled with the words. I'm not good at this. At people. At family. I've been alone for 20 years because I didn't trust myself around others. You've spent 2 months proving that wrong. What if I fail? What if I can't be what you need? Vren stepped forward. You already are. You don't understand, kid. I've done terrible things. Things I can't take back, we know. Sela took my hand, her small fingers wrapping around my scarred ones. Mother told us everything. About the war. About New Meridian. About why you live alone. And you still want this? The person who did those things is gone, Caliph said softly. The person who did this, who saved us, protected us, taught us, cared for us, he's standing right here. That's who we choose. I looked at the 3 of them. The warrior widow who'd walked through a blizzard to save her children. The boy who'd seen death and still wanted to learn. The girl who drew pictures of family and believed in them absolutely. For 20 years I told myself I didn't deserve absolution. That the weight of my actions meant solitude was not punishment but protection, for others from me. These 3 people were offering something different. Not forgetting. Not forgiveness. Just forward. A direction that wasn't backward into guilt or sideways into emptiness. Okay, I said. Let's do this. The paperwork took 4 hours. Human legal systems love paperwork, and sanctuary claims were rare enough to require extensive documentation. The counselor oversaw the process with the Marine standing watch, and by the time the sun set, it was done. Caliph Vorsena and her children, Vren and Sela, were now legally under my protection. My family. The gunship lifted off at dusk. I watched it disappear into the darkening sky, aware of Caliph standing beside me. They'll watch us, she said. Send reports. Look for violations, probably. Does that bother you? Let them watch. They'll see a family living their lives. Nothing more. A family. She tested the word. It sounds strange. Good strange or bad strange? I don't know yet. Ask me in a year. I turned to find Vren and Sela in the doorway, silhouettes against the cabin's warm light. Waiting for us. Come on, I said. It's cold out here. We walked inside together. Sela had left her newest drawing on the table. 5 figures now, with the addition of a gunship flying away in the background. She'd labeled them in careful standard letters. Mamat. Vren Daddy. Sela. Marcus. Family. I picked it up, studying the crooked lines and earnest effort. 20 years of solitude, 30 years of war, and all it took to undo me was a child's drawing. Dinner? Caliph asked. Yeah. Dinner sounds good. Brand set the table while Sela described her plans for tomorrow. Snow sculptures, she decided. An entire army of them. Caliph moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who belonged there. And I sat in the middle of it all, surrounded by noise and warmth and life, feeling something I hadn't felt in decades. Home. This was what home felt like. The butcher of New Meridian had died somewhere in the past 2 months. In his place was a man named Marcus, who had a cabin in the snow and a family he'd never expected. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't even healing, not yet. But it was a start. And for the first time in 20 years, I thought maybe that was enough.